and gentlemen, you are all participants in Boy State. Is this the 72nd rendition of Boy State in Montana? Yeah. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
71st or 72nd?
Here, just a second. Here, we'll get you some more cord. Okay, there we go.
Oh, okay.
Montana provides just as many opportunities as a lot of other places, and I think I went to Montana State University for a tour there, and one thing that they really pride themselves on is the amount of national scholarships that their students receive. And Montana State University, I know for the Goldwater Scholarship, which is a really prestigious national award, they rank amongst Ivy League schools like Harvard and like Yale, and I think it just really shows that just because we're not a very large population, we don't have a very high population in Montana, I don't think that counts us out of being able to compete with the, what we classically consider as the best and the brightest. So I think that, I think Montana provides just as many opportunities as some of the more populous states.
Rob, do you want to sit down? I can do that for a while.
You have your shoulders. I'm doing fine.
I can hold it.
My nephew is an Air Force veteran whose shoulders were shot. In part because of his military.
I drove truck and moved.
Pulling this thing up is
I wanted to do when I was your age, so I did it. Anyway, if you want to. But I'm
I don't
fine.
especially want to, I just don't want you to be in pain.
No, I'm fine. I'm not in pain.
Okay.
Oh, he's been a great big force in my life. Yeah. Anyway,
So, don't look at me, look at the camera.
where'd North go?
He had to
Norris
go
had to go to
speech
something else.
because he has the half-an-hour speech that he later for governor, so he had to go. He had to go.
I think he may have forgotten about something he was committed to do, but that's fine. So my mind is really kind of focused on our national political culture, which is dominated by television and by channels, and citizens are largely, as I read the polls, following particular channels, MSNBC or Fox News or CNN. Some of us who are real freaks about politics get into other, C-SPAN 1, 2, and 3, and PBS, and I spend a fair amount of time on news through other countries, from Japan, from India, from China, from Russia. And, the news comes out really differently if you're listening to those news channels in English. Because my hearing's so bad, I actually am reading subtitles all the time. But it's amazing how much the world is offering subtitles now, no matter where you grow up. And English is, from my point of view, fortunately, the lingua franca that everybody in Africa and Russia and South Asia and in China, they're expected to learn English enough. They obviously don't know it as well as you do, but so I'm curious how you feel about your place in the larger world. The question I asked had to do with the nation and where you see yourself fitting in 5 years and how you're going to prepare for that. Have you given thought to how you feel about the world as a large? If you think things are going to hell in a handbasket and you don't have a future, I want you to say that, because there's the goth culture of your age is common. If you go on YouTube especially, you can find a lot of kids your age coming out with, really tragic stories, and the evidence is that that's real. Even though all of it is myth, building up the Norse gods or the Greek gods and then creating something like like Harry Potter in a negative sense. It is amazing to me the power of that alternative culture that is really negative. So I'm curious how that affects you as an individual and how you see and that's a global phenomenon. It isn't just unique to the United States or Europe. Do you feel pretty positive that you're going to be able 5 years from now to step into something that satisfies you, or are you really worried about this alternative culture?
I have a lot of
I have a lot of cousins and relatives that are older than me, especially in the college world right now. I think I have 12 cousins in college right now. The sense that I'm getting from them is that there's a pretty large quiet movement in the young college kids right now towards the more conservative side. They see that the left has extremely gone to the left, and it's just not even policies anymore or any ethical thinking. It's all social work, and it has no real world purpose. And where they see that going, if the left has all the power, is a total destruction of America as we know it. But that's why there's a movement that they portray to me from, let's see, I think 3, maybe 4 different universities, not in Montana, but Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, I believe, and Arizona are the colleges that my 12 relatives are at right now. So it's a pretty large spectrum where I'm feeling this vibe from. And I feel large that they're moving to the conservative side is because they've really honed in on America's true roots, and they're seeing those roots being uprooted and trying to be changed or eliminated or ripped out of the Constitution. So that, I believe, we may be on the very brink of the climax of where the world has been looked in the wrong direction in the last 15, 20 years. I think we're just on that point where we're going to start to see a real change here in the next 5, 10, 15 years in American politics.
I agree that we're at that tipping point, but what I'm thinking is that the millennials are moving into their position. They're taking the power away from the older generations with the use of social media. So this year, movements like Walk for Our Lives, that was powered by mostly Instagram, and millions of students from all over the world were able to take place in that. From Bozeman High School, we had hundreds of students walk out. I think with movements like that, you're seeing that these millennials are saying what worked in the past is not working anymore. We didn't used to have hundreds of students shot in school. We didn't used to have this climate change problem. All these problems are arising, and we're seeing that our older generations have failed us in a way. And millennials are not going to stand for that anymore, and I think that we're pushing on. We're using our increased influence, and in a few years with the vote, I'm going to vote this year for the first time. I think that we're going to move on, find new ways, and that doesn't necessarily even just have to be liberal thinking. It can be conservative thinking too. We can use all of our resources to find more compromise and find the bigger solutions where older generations have been so polarized that they can't find any solutions at all.
Yeah, it's problems throughout the world are consistently changing. New problems arise, and problems are always maybe not always, but overcome. If we were born a generation or so ago, we would have been more focused on fighting in the world wars or whatnot. Today, those aren't our problems. Our war is more unconventional. We don't always know who we're fighting, what problems we exactly have. You mentioned like school shootings, global warming. These are the problems posed to our generation. These are the problems that we have to understand how to overcome. And once we overcome these problems, unfortunately, new problems will arise to the next generation. And it's part of humanity to continually overcome the problems that we're posed with.
Going back to that tipping point once again, I feel like our generation has been given all these problems at a young age that we're at right now, 17, 18 years old. We've been faced with all these problems now. I feel like our generation is going to be the solvers, the ones that really turn things around, because we've been going backwards, taking steps backwards for years and years and years now. things that were taking steps forwards in the 60s, now we retract, And I saw a lot of that in the Obama presidency. He was not a forward thinker. He was taking steps backwards, not only in social, but in economics and world standing for America and whatnot. But our generation is going to be the solvers. I kind of wish I was a generation behind ours, honestly, because I feel like they're going to really prosper from the solutions that we fix. I feel like our kids, the next generation, they're going to be the ones that really leap the world forward. But it's going to be up to us to solve these current problems that have aroused from the left that are, in my view, irrelevant and quite honestly stupid. It's going to be up to us to solve those and put those to rest forever, so our kids can prosper and move this world forward.
Concerning Obama as president, I'm going to argue that we did not take steps backwards. There were lots of changes that could be viewed as negative for conservative America, but overall, having the first African American as president led people to believe that change is possible and our country can keep moving forward. And we have seen things pop up with his presidency. Black Lives Matter, that was not in existence before his presidency. And those problems were. We didn't see more racism with his presidency. We saw it being exposed. And the more things are exposed, the more we can solve, the more we can handle. And so with that, I think his presidency was in the right direction for America. It was stepping forward.
Now, you mentioned that Obama introduced to America that change can happen. I'm not necessarily saying that the changes that Obama made were wrong or right in any sense, but change doesn't mean a whole lot. I just changed my hair. It didn't fix anything. It didn't really improve or necessarily even make anything worse. It was simply change. What we need to look for is improvement. And yes, while what Obama did was inspiring, he showed that, African Americans can be president as well. That's awesome. And this is America, anybody can do anything here. Those are American ideals, and I think that's awesome that he did that. But it's important that we're not just incorporating change into our society. We need to incorporate improvement into our society.
I think real quick to go off that, one of the problems that we stated earlier was climate change, which I think during Obama's term he did a great job of trying to pursue to do, like with the Paris Agreement, and he made many public appearances where that was one of his main points, along with Obamacare. However, very recently, with our most recent president, we have stepped out of the Paris Agreement, which, as we all decided, climate change is a problem that had been occurring. So I think Obama definitely was making it a point to solve some issues, and we have now taken backward steps with our more recent president.
There's one thing on the climate change that does puzzle me. Coming from an agricultural standpoint, you guys probably remember back in the 70s when they said that we were on our way to the next ice age. Was that right?
No, I don't remember that.
Okay, well, I remember that. Like,
Okay.
were you guys in Montana in the winters
I
of
was in
78, 77,
Yes,
79?
I was running the Columbia River Watch, which was all about the
Okay.
condition of water in Montana.
Okay, those winters were some of the worst winters ever. I distinctly remember my father talking about how, and my ag teacher at my school, talking about how we were headed into the next ice age because they were seeing global temperatures go down. I feel like climate change is a thing, but I feel like the information that's being shoved at us young kids, some of it's true and most of it is BS. So,
Okay.
or maybe it's based on true knowledge, but it's fluctuated and twisted around.
And I think that's part of the nature of, scientific industry,
Right.
that you're looking for it. And if you're going to say, okay, so climate change is this one thing. Like for a while, it was called global warming.
Right.
And I was like, okay, well, we understanding that it's not only just the average temperature getting warmer, but that we're seeing these greater fluctuations in weather patterns. And that is part of the nature. And the facts that we were given in many of our scientific textbooks, that they are peer-reviewed, that these are not just speculative. And when they are speculative, they're pretty forward to saying, all right, so this is the section in which this is a possibility, this is a theory. But there's also like substantial data that we've already been registering in relation to climate change.
And I feel like our generation, being the solvers, that's like kind of dubbed us before you came in. I feel like we will really improve our situation on Earth. Because I do think climate change is a thing, but I feel like we're being fed false information. And that's one thing I'd like to see is the truth. And I also feel like our generation, politics is going to see a reversion back to the truth.
How do you plan on discovering the truth?
I just think people are going to have to focus on their moral values. They're going to have to focus on them being a good person. I think largely to that, it has to do with how they're being raised at home. I feel like...
But you personally, over the next 5 years?
Me personally, I try to be the most trustworthy person I can be. Because you know what? That's
how will
being a
you
good
go about
person.
discovering the truth on climate change, for example?
That's what I'm looking for from help from people like you that know more. I just would like to be informed because I do think it's a thing, but I want to know
You want to
true
participate.
knowledge. I want to know that it's for real. It's not being influctuated by a certain political party.
And I think that you brought up like a really interesting point that I think is important for us to discuss, but like where does personal values and truth, what is their relationship? In my IB Theory of Knowledge class, which I have at 7 o'clock in the morning, dear God, we've been talking about about these ways of knowing, and one of them is reason and logic.
Right.
Now you can reason through everything, but if you have like wrong facts, then it's like, okay, well then that's one of the limitations of reasoning. But logic of course helps us hypothesize along with imagination. But then also another thing is emotion is a way of knowing, faith is a way of knowing, and so where is it that like sometimes our reason is wrong, sometimes it's right, sometimes our faith is wrong, sometimes it's right, and it's important to recognize that I think personally like the value that I think would really help us be closer to discovering the truth is this dedication to conversation, this dedication to knowing our limitations just as much as we know our strengths. And that's what science is to me.
Right.
I appreciate. I'd love to go on with this particular question, but
Yeah.
I've got a couple other in my mind as Montanans. One of the issues that's right in front of the nation right now are tariffs, particularly on aluminum and steel. The response from China was, well, we're going to put a tariff on soybeans and maybe grain. And some of that really directly affects Montana. What's your perception of China as a participant in global affairs? And do you feel the reaction they're having to the U.S. coming up with steel and aluminum tariffs is appropriate, that they should come up with agriculture tariffs? That really affects Montana. How do you feel about that?
I was going to give a chance for somebody else to talk, but being at Boise State this week, I guess I've been the agricultural man. This current trade pre-war, as they like to call it.
Trade skirmish.
Trade skirmish, not necessarily trade war. It's like trade battle. We had the tariffs implemented on steel and aluminum coming from China. I don't know how this relates to. The effects that we're going to see, I don't know if you guys noticed, but I'm trying to...
I remember your Costco analogy.
The Costco analogy. Okay, so whichever business you may be in, whether that might be retail or whatever business you can be, you can trace, if you trace the dollar through the system the whole way, if you put a red line on a dollar, you would trace that dollar from store to retail to middle guy, you would trace it all the way back to agriculture. And with these new tariffs being implemented and China putting tariffs on our agricultural products, I think if this isn't solved within a short time, we're going to really see it hurt the economy. It might not be in a year, it might be in 2 years when it starts showing up in the big picture where the media notices it. Because when it hits the agriculture, it's, first off, it's never noticed because we're less than 1% of all American population. But as Reed said, my Costco analogy, my family, we live up near Lewistown. We go to Billings every now and then, just as a family. We go to Costco. If the commodity prices are up, obviously we're going to spend $1,200, $1,300 at Costco. But if they're down, we're going to obviously budget closer, and we're not going to go to Costco. We're not going to be spending abundantly, So if I'm not spending abundantly at Costco, then that means Costco employees aren't going to get that much money. They might have to lay off people. And those Costco employees live in that town. They go spend money at your guys' business more frequently than I do. So that's how you trace that dollar back. And with these tariffs being implemented on agricultural products, I feel like that's going to have a really big effect on all economy. That's my 2 cents.
Anybody else want to comment on that? Otherwise, I'll go to another question.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think it's important that we remember President Trump has the duty to think of the United States first, not just agriculture, but as you did point out, it connects everything. So, obviously, he's not going to do something without talking to the top economists in the country and making sure that in the end, the United States is going to come out on top. And I just hope that he doesn't play with China in a way that ends up with us on the bottom.
I'm not sure if I want to get into this debate, but I'm not entirely sure President Trump is going to consult with the top economists. Or if he is, he's necessarily going to listen to them.
Trump is a businessman, so.
He is a businessman, that's right. However, I'd also like to pull back to the question about what role we see China playing, just Chinese affairs in general. And there's this one interesting that I first heard about 3 or 4 years ago from the political science professor at the University of Montana. But it's become more common in media recently, more coverage in the media, that China is implementing what is being dubbed as the new Silk Road. So essentially what they're trying to do is create this extensive system of highways, superhighways, high-speed trains that connect Beijing all the way to the west side of China, all the way through, I don't remember the exact countries, but it'll eventually end up in Turkey. So it's probably one of the most ambitious projects ever in the modern era. And what they're doing is they're providing infrastructure funding to all the countries along the route. And what they're trying to do is simply, much like the old adage, all roads lead to Rome. In this case, all roads lead to Beijing, which I think is an incredible geopolitical move. But it also, warrants us to ask, what kind of influence is China going to be having along its superhighway?
There was an article that came out not too long ago called "The Rise of China," and pretty much what it specified is how China is rising up to be, in the sense of third world superpower. It kind of mentioned how Russia had kind of taken a decline, even though I don't think they had. Or maybe they have.
Their economy's been suffering.
Their economy's been suffering. So it kind of mentioned the decline of Russia and the rise of China as a world superpower. I feel like that correlates with your Silk Road.
I got a line of questions having to do with cyber security and identity. But I'm not going to pursue that if none of you are interested in that. Maybe that's outside the realm of Montana education. Does anybody want to pitch in on, is this your responsibility to take on Facebook and Zucker and the people who become multi-billionaires based on getting ads for their internet capabilities, which all of us participate in now?
I think one key thing that is important for us to recognize when we use the internet is that there is all these algorithms going on behind the scenes that are tracking what we're clicking on. The rationale behind that is, therefore we can get ads for things that we're actually interested in. Like, no, they're not going to advertise to us for Legos because we're 17 years old, but rather, things that we may actually generally be interested in. But on that same token, that's some valuable information that is not only marketable, that businesses can use that to collect data on what we want, but some really personal, intimate information about how we use the internet. And that more importantly, there's been whole algorithms that have been able to recognize political leanings. They've been able to recognize, without you even entering in any specific data, your gender, your sexual orientation, your economic class, and your ethnicity to a certain extent, and that kind of very personal information. Like, one thing that I've noticed that this is already being used is, like, on the Instagram page, the Explorer page, where you're just kind of scrolling through things, that it'll recommend content. And I liked one political thing, whatever, and pretty soon, like, on a lot of tests that I've taken, I'm pretty centrist. But it started skewing me off because I'm just a little bit of a left-leaning because of my family. It started skewing me off onto this where I was like super anti-Trump, where I was like, it was like recommending like all these gay pages to me, and I was like, no, thank you. That's not really what I want to be viewing. And all sorts of like fairly political left-wing content, fairly radical, that I had no interest in, but it started like, okay, so here's this channel, a belief that other people have supported that you should follow. And that's not something that I'm really interested in, having that kind of control over what I view, my mind, more importantly.
That ties back to the false information being shoved at us young people.
Mm-hmm. That is,
comment. You're being quiet.
that is like, at a young age, we're like the willow. We're still flexible, we're still manipulative, and that's the internet really targets the younger generation because that's where they're gonna change us. And that's why so much of this political stuff goes on through the internet. That's where the younger generation interacts with each other. As we grow older, our values, our beliefs, they're a little more set. I mean, even us, I believe a lot of you gentlemen are a lot more stronger in your values and bases and already sharing those across the world. But as we pursue our career, whatever we go on to do, we have to still, yes, be the willow, but we can't be changed by just anything. With the cybersecurity stuff, false propaganda, whatever, corrupt information on the internet, you have to really you have to know the accountability of what information you're being presented with. So, like you say, I mean, you like one thing, bam, they're gonna do everything they can to make sure you're changed the way they want you to change.
And with that, like, accountability, the question is, like, how do we determine something that is accountable or not accountable? Because, like, in the ideal world, every one of us, to get our news, would be checking 10 different sources. We'd know everything about every single author that we're reading. First thing, we'd like even actually know the authors' names of several things. Like, can anyone name anybody that's at BuzzFeed, at Washington Post, at New York Times, any of that? We might be able to name like Breitbart, but then again, he got fired. Now I'm forgetting his name. I feel like an idiot. Like, to what standard are we going to hold our politicians, hold our reporters, hold our leaders to? Because to what extent is it our job to thoroughly research, like historians, or to kind of lay back research? Kind of just like watch the TV and let it come to us.
Like, focus on the facts instead of who's presenting them.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think it is important for us to understand who is presenting them, but also to understand if they're really who we
But
think
in
they
an
are.
ideal world, we could just look at what's going on and not have to analyze whether it's true or not.
Yeah.
Correct?
You had something to say, didn't you?
Yeah, I was just gonna say about when it comes to I'm sorry, you said it was like cybersecurity, right? Isn't that what you brought up?
Yeah.
So I read a book called Weapons of Math Destruction, and it's very much so what it sounds. And one of the main examples in that book is talking about what information they take while you're browsing, and some of the unjust things that have happened. One of them being if you try to get a loan from a bank on a website, it finds out where you are, and then it finds out how credible you are given your location. And that's clearly not fair because it's judging you by how credible the people around you are. And I'm very interested in data analytics, and I want to go in to be able to say, look at the hard proof and the numbers and say, no, that is not right, or yeah, it's okay that they're doing that, because most of the time these people are okay with that. Where they live is showing what they like, how they come out. So I guess it's all up to each person on whether or not they think it's right or wrong to be accountable for what they're searching and how that changes their internet and all. But
Actually, I heard this really interesting program that China started domestically